The world of moving planes. The logic of animals will differ from ours firstly in the fact that it will not be general. It will exist separately for each case, for each perception. Common properties, class properties and the general or specific signs of categories will not exist for animals. Each object will exist in and by itself, with all of its properties being specific for that object alone. This house and that house are entirely different objects for an animal, because one is its house and the other is a strange house. Generally speaking, we recognize objects by the signs of their similarity. An animal must recognize them by the signs of their difference. It remembers each object by that sign which had for it the greatest emotional meaning. In such a manner, i.e. by their emotional tones, perceptions are stored in the memory of an animal. It is clear that such perceptions are much more difficult to store up, and therefore the a priori memory of an animal is more burdened than ours. Although in the amount of knowledge, and in the quality of that knowledge which is preserved in memory, it stands far below us. After seeing an object once, we refer it to a certain class, genus and species, placing it under this or that concept, then fix it in mind by means of some word, or tag, i.e. an algebraical symbol, then by another defining it, and so on. An animal has no concepts, lacking that mental algebra with the aid of which we think. It must know a given object, and remember it always with all of its signs and peculiarities. No forgotten sign will return. For us, on the other hand, the principal signs are contained in the concept with which we have correlated that object, and we can find it in our memory by means of the sign for it. From this, it is clear that the memory of an animal is more burdened than ours, and this is the principal impediment to the mental evolution of an animal. Its mind is too busy, and it has no time to develop. The mental development of a child can be arrested by making it memorize a series of words or figures. The animal is in just such a position, and herein lies the explanation of the strange fact that an animal is wiser when it is young. In man, the flower of intellectual force blooms at a mature age, often almost in senility. In an animal, however, quite the reverse is true, and it is receptive only when it is young. At maturity its development stops, and in old age, it undoubtedly degenerates. The logic of animals, were we to attempt to express it by means of formulae similar to those employed by Aristotle and Bacon, would be as follows. The formula A is A. The animal will understand, it will say, as it were, I am I, etc. However, the formula A is not A. It will be incapable of understanding. Not A is indeed the concept. The animal will reason thus: this is this, that is that, this is not that. Or this man is this man, that man is that man, this man is not that man. We shall return to the logic of animals later. However, for the present it is necessary only to establish the fact that the psychology of animals is peculiar, and different in a fundamental way from our own. Not only are these differences peculiar, but they are decidedly manifold. Among animals known to us, even among domestic animals, the psychological differences are so great as to differentiate them into entirely separate planes. We ignore this and place them all under a single rubric: animals. A goose, having wedged a piece of watermelon rind in its foot, drags it along by the web and thus cannot get it out. It never thinks of simply raising its foot. This indicates that its mind is so vague that it does not know its own body, scarcely distinguishing between it and other objects. This would happen neither with a dog, nor with a cat, as they know their bodies very well. However, in their relation to outside objects the dog and the cat differ very widely. If you observe a house dog in its basket, he will understand when the little rug or blanket upon which he sleeps gets crumpled and becomes uncomfortable to sleep on, that the nuisance is outside of him, that it is with the rug, and a certain definite position of the rug. Therefore he will catch hold of the rug with his teeth, turn it and push it here and there with his paws, while growling, sighing or moaning until someone comes to his aid, for he was never able to rectify the difficulty. With the cat, such a question could never arise. The cat knows her body very well, but everything outside of herself she takes as her due, as given. to correct the outside world, to accommodate it to her own comfort, never enters into the cat's mind. Perhaps this is because she lives more in another world, in the world of dreams and fantasies, than in this world. A cat sleeps more than 20 hours daily. Accordingly, if there was something wrong with her basket, then the cat would turn herself around and about repeatedly until she could lie down comfortably, or when this fails, she will go and lie in some other place. The monkey would spread the rug very easily indeed. Here then we have four beings, all quite different, and this is only one example. It would be possible to collect others by the hundred, and meanwhile there is for us just one animal. We mix together many things that are quite different, and our divisions are often incorrect, which hinders us when it comes to self-study. To declare that manifest differences determine the evolutionary grade or level, that animals of one type are higher or lower than those of another, would be entirely false. The dog and the monkey, by their intellect and their ability to imitate, by reason of the dog's fidelity to man, are as it were higher than the cat. However, the cat is infinitely superior to them in intuition, aesthetic sense, independence and force of will. The monkey and the dog manifest themselves in toto, all that they have is seen. The cat, on the other hand, is not without reason regarded as a magical and even occult animal. In her there is much hidden of which she herself does not know. If one speaks in terms of evolution, it is more correct to say that the cat and the dog are animals of different evolutions, just as in all probability not one but several evolutions are simultaneously going forward in humanity. The recognition of several independent, and from one standpoint equivalent evolutions, developing entirely different properties, would lead us out from the labyrinth of endless contradictions in our understanding of man, and show us the path to the only real and important evolution for us, the evolution of super-man. Having thus established the difference existing between the psychology of a man and of an animal, this difference undoubtedly affects the receptivity of the outer world by an animal. But how, and in what way? To this end, we should examine our receptivity of the world and investigate the nature of that receptivity, then try to imagine how an animal with more limited psychic capacity would receive its impressions of the world. First, it is necessary to note that we receive an incorrect impression of the world as regards its outer form and aspect. We know that the world consists of solids, yet we see and touch only surfaces. We never see and touch a solid, although we easily accept things as being solid. The solid, which is indeed a concept, is composed of a series of perceptions, the result of reasoning and experience. However, for immediate sensation, only surfaces exist. Sensations of gravity, mass and volume that we mentally associate with the solid, are in reality associated with the sensations of surfaces. We only know that the sensation comes from the solid, but the solid itself we never sense. Perhaps it would be possible to call the complex sensation of surfaces, weight, mass, density and resistance, the sensation of a solid, but rather we combine mentally all of these sensations into one and call that composite sensation a solid. We sense directly only surfaces, and the weight or resistance of the solid as such, we never separately sense. However, we know that the world does not consist of surfaces. We know that we see the world incorrectly and that we never see it as it is, not only in the philosophical sense of the word but also in the simplest geometrical sense. We have never seen a cube, a sphere, etc., only their surfaces, and knowing this we mentally correct that which we see. Behind the surfaces, we think the solid, but we can never represent the solid to ourselves. We cannot imagine the cube or the sphere seen, not in perspective but simultaneously from all sides. It is clear that the world does not exist in perspective, nevertheless we cannot see it otherwise. We see everything only in perspective, and the very act of receptivity of the world is distorted in our eye, and we know it is distorted. We know that everything is not as it appears and mentally are continuously correcting that which the eye sees, substituting the real content for those symbols of things which sight reveals. Our sight is a complex faculty, consisting of visual sensations plus the memory of sensations of touch. A child tries to feel with its fingertips everything that it sees, the nose of its parents, the moon and the reflection of sun rays from the mirror on the wall. Only gradually does it learn to discern the near and the distant by means of sight alone. Yet in mature age we know, we are easily subject to optical illusion. We see distant objects as flat, even more incorrectly, because relief is after all a symbol revealing a certain property of objects. A man at a great distance is pictured to us in silhouette. This happens because we never feel anything at a long distance, and the eye has been taught only to discern the difference between surfaces, which at short distances are felt by the fingertips. We can never see, even for a minute, any part of the outer world as it is, that is as we know it. We can never see the desk or the wardrobe all at once, from all sides and also inside. Our eye distorts the outside world in a certain way, in order that looking about we may be able to define the position of objects relative to our own space. However, to look at the world from any standpoint other than our own is impossible for us, neither can we ever see it correctly without distortion by our sight. Relief and perspective, these constitute the distortion of the object by our eye. They are optical illusions, delusions of sight. The cube in perspective is but a conventional sign of the three-dimensional cube, and all that we see is the image of that conditionally real three-dimensional world with which our geometry deals, and not the world itself. On the basis of what we see, we surmise that it exists in reality. We know that what we see is incorrect, and we think of the world as other than it appears. If we had no doubt about the correctness of our sight, if we knew that the world was such as it appears, then obviously we would think of the world in the manner in which we see it. In reality, however, we are constantly engaged in making corrections. It is clear that the ability to make corrections in that which the eye sees demands the possession of the concept, because the corrections are made by a process of reasoning, which is impossible without concepts. Deprived of the faculty to make corrections in that which the eye sees, we would have a different outlook on the world, i.e., much of that which is, we would see incorrectly. We would not see much of that which is, but much of that which does not exist in reality at all. Firstly, we would see an enormous number of non-existent motions. Every motion of ours, in our direct sensation of it, is bound up with the motion of everything around us. We know that this motion is an illusory one, and yet we see it as real. Objects turn in front of us, run past us and overtake one another. If we are driving slowly past houses, then these turn slowly, and if we are driving faster, then they turn faster. Trees grow up before us unexpectedly, run away and disappear. This apparent animation of objects, coupled with dreams, has always inspired, and still inspires fairy tales. The motions of objects, to a person in motion, are very complex. Observe how strangely a field of wheat behaves just beyond the window of the car in which you are traveling. It runs up to the very window, stops, turns slowly around itself and then runs away again. The trees of the forest run apparently at different speeds, overtaking one another. The entire landscape is one of illusory motion. This is all seeming, and although we know that these motions are illusory, we still see them nevertheless, and sometimes we are deluded by them. How many more illusions would be observed if we lacked the power to mentally analyze their determining causes, if we were obliged to believe everything exists as it appears to us? I see it, therefore this exists. This affirmation is the principal source of all illusions, therefore to be true it is necessary to say, I see it, therefore this does not exist, or at least, I see it, therefore this is not so. Although we can say that for the last the animal cannot, for to its apprehension things are always as they appear, and it must believe precisely what it sees. How does the world then appear to an animal? The world appears to it as a series of complicated moving surfaces. The animal lives in a world of two dimensions. Its universe has for it the properties and appearance of a surface, and upon this surface transpire an enormous number of different movements of a most fantastic nature. Why should the world appear to an animal as a surface? First of all, because it appears as a surface to us. However, we know that the world is not a surface, but the animal cannot know. It has to accept everything just as it appears, as it is powerless to correct the testimony of its eyes, or it cannot do so to the same extent that we do. We are able to measure in three mutually independent directions. The nature of our mind permits us to do this. An animal can measure simultaneously in two directions only. It can never measure in three directions at once. This is due to the fact that, not possessing concepts, it is unable to retain in the mind the idea of the first two dimensions for measuring the third. Examining this more closely, suppose we imagine that we are measuring a cube. In order to measure the cube in three directions, it is necessary, while measuring in one direction, to keep in mind two others, to remember. But it is impossible to keep them in mind as concepts only, that is, associating them with different concepts, pasting upon them different labels. So, pasting upon the first two directions the labels of length and breadth, it is possible for us to measure the third direction, height. It is impossible otherwise. As perceptions, the first two measurements of the cube are completely identical, and assuredly will mingle into one in the mind. An animal, without the aid of concepts, cannot paste upon the first two measurements the labels of length and breadth. Therefore, at the moment when it begins to measure the height of the cube, the first two measurements will be confused into one, and the animal attempting to measure the cube by means of perceptions only, without the aid of concepts, will be like the cat that seeks to move its kittens to another room. She will drag her offspring into different rooms, and then be unable to collect them back together again. She will seize one and put it beside another, run for a third and bring it to the first two, but then seize the first again and carry it off to a different room, putting it beside the fourth. After that, she will run back and seize the second and drag it to a room containing the fifth, and so on. For a great deal of time the cat will have no rest and accomplish nothing because she lacks the concepts that would enable her to remember how many kittens she has. It requires the intervention of the cat's owner to alleviate this distress.